Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. It's currently the morning after the night before. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, Newcastle 5, Aston Villa 1. Sobering is, I think, the
Yes,
buzzword.
yes, I would totally agree, mate. I think kind of a reality check or bringing us back down to earth might be a little bit far, but it is just a reminder to not go too crazy this season. Obviously, you and I were just chatting before we came on air about a lot of the narrative, not just in some Villa fans, but amongst other fan bases, has been that, you need to watch out for Villa as an outside top four threat and everything like that. And a lot of Villa fans sort of saying that, yeah, we can start to look above Newcastle now in the league and everything like that. Just sort of a reminder that, there's a reason we were in the Conference League last season, the reason they were in the Champions League, and that was kind of they're such a very difficult team to play against. I think it's important not to get too high with the highs or too low with the lows, but a reminder that there's still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And it's a frustrating one. And I feel like there's not a lot for, you guys, we know our wonderful listeners, our wonderful audience like to come to us for insight and, tactical analysis and all that. I feel like there's not a lot that we can really take from this because 2 of the goals were offside. I've watched it back so many times. I especially can't believe how the first Isaac goal is given he's offside. You've got Botman offside, who obviously assists. And there's another Newcastle player in there that's offside as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think the only complaint from that I can look is Villa are holding such a strong line until you get to Matty Cash. And I think that's where they've been able to sort of sneak in there. And again, I still think they're offside, but if I'm being really sort of anal about sort of analysing that one, it's basic, innit, mate? Holding your line on a set play, that's playground stuff, mate. That's, again, and I'm not singling Kashi out because, again, he's offside. Like, this is an error that has come from the VAR team and from the officials on the ground on the day in awarding that, but you have to cover your own back as much as possible. Kashi's holding the line, then we're not even having this debate. The game could look potentially completely different, really, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of this has come out of like really fine margins, to be honest with you, and it just goes to show how once a couple of those go against you in a stadium like that, we spoke in the pre-match, didn't we, about the kind of atmosphere we'd face at St James's and what, obviously the upwards trajectory that they've been on. This is their first season with Champions League football, their first game with a very, in what looked to be a very competitive game. We always knew the atmosphere was going to be very good, and as soon as you start to feel those margins going against you and your grip on the game kind of loosening, it's one of those few stadiums really where turning that tide can just feel so difficult. Mm-hmm. I think St James's is kind of one of the places you look at somewhere like Anfield, and I think Old Trafford has had this sort of in the past, and more so recently they're kind of getting that back where once the game starts to go against you and the momentum builds with the home side, it's just near enough impossible to turn that around. And then when you start to pick up the injuries and stuff like that, unless you have such a firm grip on the game and you're able to reestablish that really quickly, this can just happen to you in the blink of an eye, really. And all of a sudden you can just find yourself just being battered from pillar to post, and you're kind of taking any respite that you can. And that's what St James's is becoming. And I think really that's what separates a lot of teams from the rest of the crop, really, in that you get to these few places where as soon as the noise picks up and you're in this stadium, that you just know that it's really going to be difficult for you. And yeah, obviously we've seen that at difference at grounds in the past, but St James's is becoming that, and you have to give the Newcastle fans credit there, because you know that once that crowd picks up, when you can see a goal inside 10 minutes, it's so difficult to re-establish any kind of control. And Villa, I felt that we were in it at 2-1. I went into half-time not completely devoid of any confidence, but you know that to overturn a deficit at any point without the injuries or anything like that is going to be so difficult. And yeah, we just never really managed to get hold of it, I didn't think.
The turning point really for me was at 3-1 Watkins sits share down, really nice little bit of skill, gets a shot off, saved by Nick Pope, and then obviously Matty Cash has almost gaping goal, which he somehow manages to put across the other side. I think if Villa score that, it's a completely different game. It is a completely different game, but it's hard, and it would be stupid not to acknowledge how both teams really fell so flat after the just honestly heartbreaking, gut-wrenching injury to Tyrone Mings. Got to give a shout out to the Newcastle fans, as you just mentioned, mate. They were brilliant. I thought they were especially brilliant with Mings when he was coming off, and generally the sort of social media reaction from them has been pretty good. So got to give them credit where credit is due. And obviously Eddie Howe as well, somebody who signed Tyrone at Bournemouth, came out with a very nice statement in the press conference. It's just, after that, man, I just there was just this feeling. I couldn't even think about the game really, and I've sort of tweeted about it. It's such a shame considering we've got a potential European adventure on the horizon. We've got 2 massive games against either Hibs or Luzerne on the horizon, and for John McGinn and for Tyrone Mings, who have really been on this whole journey with us, and to be the only 2 people, I know obviously Courtney and Keenan and a few others are still around, but obviously not involved, to have been so instrumental in sort of giving us our club back, and have managed to level up in ways that I don't think anybody would have predicted for both of them. With every single Villa fan has at times doubted whether Tyrone Mings or John McGinn would be good enough for the next step.
Yeah.
And they've both consistently been able to level up their game. The fact that we're going to potentially be going to Easter Road or Switzerland without Tyrone Mings in the squads, that is something that's been really difficult for me to sort of process, and I'm sure even more difficult for Tyrone. It looked like a horrible injury, complete freak accident. I think if you're going to have a complaint at the linos, not flagging up when they should, but that's the rules. We can't really. That's just how it is, isn't it? The shoulder to shoulder was completely fair with Isak, and these things just happen. But to lose Ty 3 days after we've lost Emmy, I mean, they're gonna have to print some more shirts, mate, for the next game. You're gonna have to have some Tyrone shirts out for the Everton game. But all jokes aside, it's that, to be honest, that affected me more than the loss, and just how the game ended up panning out, because he's our leader, man. He's our leader. He's the sort of beating heart of the club.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's one where you he's the captain. Let's be, If Stevie hadn't taken it off him and given it to John McGinn, he'd still be the captain now, I think.
Yeah.
I just think we're in a position where, because of how important John McGinn is, and I think realistically, even if you were to switch it, McGinn would end up as vice captain. It's probably not worth the switch, but I think if you kind of were able to make that decision without any of the emotional fallout, I think everybody sees Tyrone Mings as the vocal leader for Aston Villa Football Club. And, look, listeners to the Villa Filler podcast will know that you and I so often try and put an optimistic spin on things, and here's my take on it. I think, I'm going to try. It's a bit of a reach, but I think this could be beneficial to Aston Villa Football Club, not in terms of getting results or anything like that, but this club needs to learn how to win games without Tyrone Mings. Yeah. We've only won 1 of the 12 games we've played without Tyrone since we got promoted to the Premier League. It was a home win against Norwich in the season. They got relegated. Conor Horan, I believe, scoring the winning goal there, and we only scraped by in that game. And so if we are going to begin this process of rotating centre-backs and having, new look back fours and who knows, back fives in different games, given that even without an injury, Tyrone probably wasn't going to feature, or definitely wasn't going to feature in every game this season, we need to learn how to win games without him. We need to find the other leaders within the squad, and we need to find the people that be that in the squad right now, or even if we have to look again into the transfer market, who is the guy that's going to replace him? Because that is something that we kind of never had to deal with, because Tyrone has very much been ever present in this side. But we need to learn how to do that. Yeah, this side needs to learn how to do that, especially, if we want to go on a European adventure and all that kind of stuff and still have a good season. pretty quickly now. Our hand has been forced, and we've not had to learn how to win without Tyrone in the way in which we'd wanted. We'd like to have done it on a rotational basis rather than the fact that, we're going to be without him for a significant period of time. That's the challenge that Villa face now. That's something that we need to tackle. And ultimately, I do think that it may well be beneficial because, who knows? Tyrone is not getting any younger, and we have to begin rotating and everything like that. And we don't want to rely so much on individual players. I think that's the whole principle of building out a squad, is that individuals that were so important last season that were ever present, you start to put in a position where you can loosen up their roles a little bit and you can rotate them a little bit more because you've got someone waiting in the wings that can come in and do a very similar job. And whether that be Pau Torres, we're really going to find out whether he's worth his salt now. I think that's probably going to be a good thing for Villa because Tyrone is very important for this team. I think he's our most important player, but he's probably too important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think the thing is, there's a legitimate argument for Pau. Obviously, didn't necessarily cover himself in great glory and has looked okay in pre-season, but there is a legitimate argument that Pau is the superior defender out of him and Tyrone. But what you can't analyze and what you can't compare metrics, you can't put a number on what Ty brings on the field in communication and in organisation and in leadership. You can't quantify that. That's not something that you can just pluck out of thin air. Especially, I would expect Diego's English has improved. He's had a whole year of, not necessarily playing. He got injured about this time last year, didn't he? So I imagine he's had a lot of time to improve on his English. Obviously, Power's just signed. Don't expect him to be such a communicator. But it showed yesterday, mate. Conser looks absolutely lost without Ty. I do not think he even debates doing a little ball roll in the box and trying to shimmy it and losing it in the way he did if Tyrone's there, because he's screaming Rose Ed, Rose Ed. And I think there's going to be a few players that do struggle without that. But, say we have to go on that. We have to, somebody's going to have to step up and be a leader. Steven Gerrard did obviously make Diego Carlos his captain. So there must be something in that. Other than the delusion of just taking it off Tyrone, there has to be some merit in why he made Diego the captain. So hopefully that leadership can, Diego, Pau, whoever it may be that fills the Tyrone Mings shaped hole in the squad, can take up that mantle, because ultimately they're the intangibles that you can't put a number on are sometimes the most important, especially in a position like the defence, where there's such an emphasis on partnership and mutual understanding. And, you can say what you want about Mings and Conser. Some fans may not rate either of them or one or the other, but I don't think you can question their sort of understanding, and obviously the importance of having a strong centre-back pairing. But we just touched on it there, mate, a bit with the injuries. It's really devastating. It feels like step backwards almost, because we've gone and recruited 3 players, we've then lost 2. It's still there's still some glaring issues in the squads. I don't want to overreact. I think there has been a lot of that on Twitter yesterday, which is one of the reasons why we're coming at you with this a day later. You guys know we like to try and deliver the coldest takes possible on the Villa Filler podcast, but that right hand side's so weak, and again, this isn't me coming out and defending Leon, because you guys know I like Leon. He has to do more, and I just find it frustrating that when there was a game plan that we knew worked to perfection, we beat Newcastle 4-0 in our own backyard. Why would we change things up so sort of drastically? And you may think, damn, why are you being so hyperbolic? But playing John McGinn on the left-hand side of the midfield yesterday, when we knew sticking John McGinn on Dan Burn caused them so much to give their left-hand side the free rein, really, because Leon's work rate just isn't there. He's culpable in the first goal. Matty Cash, questions around him being good enough, both offensively and defensively. It's just individual mistakes that just are popping up too often. And I don't want to dwell on the negatives for too long, mate, because, we've Diaby, fantastic debut, mate.
Yep,
really did
absolutely.
impress, didn't he? And, I mentioned Leon to say that's the difference between the two players, isn't it? That goal, that perfectly epitomises why we've gone out and got him. And I think Leon will be sort of looking over his shoulder. But Diaby's numbers are great. Obviously scored the goal, 87.5% pass accuracy, had 100% dribble attempts that were successful and 100% pass accuracy with his long balls. Looked like a real live wire. Put himself about in such a short time, seems to have sort of conjured up quite the understanding with Watkins. Really impressive in general, really, mate. And coming back to a home crowd now against Everton next week, he's laid really solid foundations on his debut.
Yeah, I really need to find these players, right, that can put the team on their back and be like, okay, it's not going our way, I'm going to change that. I think the top sides all have those kinds of players, and it was really refreshing to see Diaby in this very difficult atmosphere that we've both been sort of depicting stand up and finish that chance, because it's not probably as easy as it looks trying to take that sort of on the volley when the ball's coming across you like that. So I was really impressed, and I want to see him become that guy that we can lean on, and we need to find those kind of players, because I think we kind of have a very cohesive squad on its day. But I think for a long time, Villa have had a squad where when it's not going so well, that there isn't that player that can drag it and pick us up forward and really stands out from the pack. And so we need to kind of find those individuals. And I think Diaby's starting to look like one, to be honest with you, given the goals that he's scored in pre-season, given his 1v1 ability, the ability to beat a man. When we're talking about margins, those are the things that can change games. When you're under the cosh, if you've got a winger that can beat 2 or 3 men, beat the press and get out on the counter-attack, it can really help change things. And so that's kind of who I think Diaby will be. But yeah, look, it's match day 1. You're absolutely right, mate. This season is going to be a lot longer for Villa. I think it was really interesting to see. I was watching the highlights of the Madrid game. Eder Militao, in a very similar situation to Ty, did his ACL as well. And you kind of feel that, given the changes that we're sort of seeing in the laws, in that we're playing more minutes in a game now, we're playing longer games than ever before, we're playing more games than ever before, as you kind of noted with the offside, we're playing these kind of, the more that the ball stays in play, the less the times the referee blows a whistle in the game. That's what they're aiming for. Probably going to see these kind of things more often, and it's a shame. But yeah, it's one where there are definitely some positives. But yes, you're right, mate. Not to get too high with the highs, too low with the lows. I saw someone sum it up really nicely in that there was a real lack of panic from Newcastle fans after they lost at Villa Park. Yeah, at the back end of last season, you didn't see Newcastle fans going into meltdown saying, "Oh my God, are we going to throw away this top 4?" Like, it was all very much, okay, it happens. We're probably due on to the next one. And I think that's the kind of situation we look at. Next Sunday, when we play Everton, it's going to be a different story. I honestly think that if Villa go and beat Everton next weekend and we pick up a couple of signings, looks like Zaniolo's pretty close. If there's 2 signings by the time we go into the weekend after next, and we've picked up 3 points at Villa Park, all of a sudden the atmosphere just changes completely. And I think that's where we need to focus our attention now. Unai's a learner. He needs to learn. These are the games where we find out really what he's worth as this kind of master tactician. We know he likes his videotapes and everything like that, and we have to trust that he's going to come out and find the solutions. And so, yeah, Sunday at Villa Park, hopefully we pick up 3 points. And I think with a couple of buddies through the door, I just think the whole mood changes again.
Yeah, absolutely. They're definitely going to be watching this one back on half speed, make it twice as long for the players so it really drills in. There's so much more you can learn from a loss, though. And I think if you look back, obviously not suggesting that this was anywhere near as bad as what was it, like 12 or 13-3 aggregate in the consecutive games against Leicester, Manchester City and Arsenal. We learned so much from that. We then went 10 games unbeaten. So it's clear to Unai that, he knows how to respond from this, and we just got to put our faith in that. But yeah, Zaniolo, as you mentioned, mate, kind of re-emerged out of nowhere, and I think, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously Fabrizio was reporting it, a few of the outlets were reporting it, but it kind of broke before we were officially fed the Buendia news. I wonder if this was in reaction to that, because Zaniolo, he's spoke about on the podcast before, so we won't go into great detail about him. You guys can find that video on the channel where Dan and I do a bit of a breakdown on him. But the timing's interesting, to say the least, isn't it, mate? They're talking about a loan with a €3 million fee, and then an option to buy on a 5-year contract for around €20 million. Again, this is a player who's done his ACL in both legs, but he's someone who's shone so brightly and someone who Monchi has had personal dealings with in the past. Really sort of made a bit of a name for himself at Inter before having a move about, finds himself in Turkey now. I was watching a few old podcasts the other day, mate, and it's funny because we was talking, it was around the time Bertrand Traore came back, and obviously we kind of said, like, when you go to Turkey, that's you done. But we're now seeing quite a few players come back from Turkey, and listen, yeah, a respectable output in Turkey. I believe it was 12 goals, 12 games, 5 goals, 3 assists at Galatasaray, which, is nothing to scoff your nose at, really. Hasn't necessarily hit the heights he would have hoped. Injuries have played a part to that, but it's someone Monchi clearly knows very well. Isn't exactly a Buendia replacement, but will help bolster in that position nevertheless. How are you feeling about this one, mate, especially given the context of that Buendia injury?
I think the deal makes perfect sense given the Buendia injury, don't you? A loan where, you have the option to assess at the end of the season how it looks in terms of Buendia coming back. Do you feel that we still need those two buddies? Do you then activate for a pretty modest fee if he's been a success? A 5-year deal would be a big show of faith, but you're starting to see that longer contracts are a trend. I think he's someone that I don't think will light the place up. I think he'll be a very good option. I think if he can hit the heights that we saw in Serie A, he was the league's Young Player of the Year back in 2019. He's won the Conference League as well with Roma, which I think is an important thing to mention. So someone that's got experience in going all the way on that particular journey. The move to Turkey was an interesting one, but it's kind of, you're seeing with the kind of team that Galatasaray are putting together, why, guys like Wilfried Zaha are choosing to go out there and play in that team. It's a really interesting squad that they're building. It's one where I actually don't really see where the sense in this is for Galatasaray, to be honest with you. I think it makes sense for all parties but them. I think obviously he's going to be such a big part of their squad, such a big part of their title win last season, and you're losing him for just $3 million per a season, and then there's not even an obligation. It's kind of only an option. Is a really interesting one, but yeah, I think it makes sense for all parties, to be honest with you. I don't think it's a like for like, but I think he could certainly play the role. I think it's one where, if this goes well, it could go really well, but it's not one where I'm going to hang my hat on, but I think it's a very good option to add to the rotation. I'm really happy that, I think a lot of Villa fans were a bit sceptical of it at first, but then when we saw the loan with the option, I think everyone's agreed that probably makes a lot of sense in the situation that we're in.
Yeah, I think we're kind of at a point now where I think the injuries have sort of made people realise you do need to make these kind of signings, where like a month and a half ago when we initially spoke about this, mate, people would have gone, well, why would we do that? But it's evident anything can happen at any given time to your best players, and we're now suffering that. It only takes one more injury and we're just completely hampered. Boubacar Kamara all of a sudden decides to go kaput again. Where do we go there? Which is why so many people, I can't understand why people would have been against Tyler Adams. That may be on the cards again now with his Chelsea deal falling through. I would anticipate at least 3 more signings before the deadline, just given the positions we need to strengthen, and then re-strengthen now with the injuries. So I'd keep an eye out for us being very busy, especially late on. I've just got a really sneaky suspicion, mate, that in the final hour we're gonna, make a real big effort to go for João Felix. There's just something that's telling me it's not. I mean, I know he's rejected multiple advances from us since January, but it's looking like us or Saudi. And I think if Felix ends up in Saudi, then it's going to be there's no big club that will touch him after that if he does a year or two over there in Europe. So I mean, maybe I'm just being optimistic. I know obviously we're one of the few teams that seem to be pretty interested in him, but I'd still anticipate probably 3 or maybe 4 arrivals before the end of the window.
Yeah, I think that my kind of perception of that move would depend really on how Villa are looking at that point in time, because we know that João Felix doesn't necessarily, let's have it right, doesn't necessarily want to be at Aston Villa, is why he's holding out to see if there's a better option. And I think in games, if João Felix is coming to Villa already a bit, okay, if this is my best option, let's give it a shot. And then you put him in the middle of the park yesterday, all of a sudden, I would worry. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I think, and so I do definitely agree with you, mate. Definitely agree with you that there's a big move in Villa yet, and I think we're holding out to the end of the window to make it, because I don't think we do have to be realistic and kind of take a kind of step back and be like, Villa aren't going to be option for, we've seen links to Vlahovic and Lukaku and Felix, and none of them are going to jump at the chance to join Aston Villa in June or July. It's just not going to happen. However, on August 31st, when it's like, you're either frozen out the squad or you get to go and play for another team, they're more likely to make that move. And I think my perception on a move around that depends very much on how Villa are doing at the time, because as I said, like, I really think we need psychologically strong players that you can lean on. And I think that's what's kind of been missing from Coutinho, in that, like, and guys like Bailey, in that they have the ability to be those guys, but psychologically they just seem to be a bit wishy-washy. And I feel like when the good times are good, that Coutinho suddenly looks great on the ball, but like when we're losing, we really need him. Like, just never, be it injury or anything like that with Bailey or Coutinho, they're just never quite there. And that's the thing for me. Is that I think, I saw a link this morning to Acuna from Atletico, which is another left back, it's an interesting one, but he is kind of one of those players that I think is just so gritty and determined that I would almost action it for that kind of thing alone. And mentality as well as profile is something that I'd really urge Villa to kind of consider going forward. And I think that's something that you have to look at with the Zaniolo deal as well, is that kind of mentally, what kind of player are you signing here? So I think through that prism is how I'll look at all of our signings through to the end of the window, to be honest with you. And that would be my only word of caution with someone like Felix, but he's he would be one of the best players we'd ever signed for this football club. So that's the reality of the situation. Yeah,
definitely. I like the Acuna links. Versatile, can step into midfield, bit of a free kick specialist, World Cup winner, friend of Diaby. You're right. I think there does need to be, like Acuna is, let's get it right, he's not a very sexy option, but I think he, multiple Europa League winner as well. That's the kind of player that, I mean, he is obviously a high profile. So if you're going to go, I'm not saying he's not sexy in that aspect, but in terms of what you're getting on the pitch, there does need to be maybe a bit of a rethink. Not a rethink, because I think it's probably always been at the forefront of Unai and Monchi's mind, but I would probably take a couple of less sexy names for, in exchange for some leadership and grit and determination, because I think we still lack that, and especially losing Tyrone. We don't need to replace Tyrone as a player. We need to replace those intangibles that I spoke about earlier, and I think that definitely is something that Nkuya would definitely do. But we're gonna have to keep our eyes peeled for that one, mate. But yeah,
it's interesting. Like, do you kind of miss, like, Ash would be a good presence in this situation? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a shame that you kind of now look at his departure and think, you know what, Ashley Young would probably be very bloody useful in the dressing room at this moment in time, but no, you are.
Well, he was probably Everton's best player on the pitch the other day as well against Fulham in that game. You know, they really dominated that game, but couldn't get it over the line. You're right. It's a bit of a tough one to take, really. That I'm still not. I don't think I'm over that one just yet. But you know, we live and learn, don't we? We live and learn. Unai's decision is final. And yeah, I think he'll have learned a lot from that. Guys, let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below on everything we've just spoke about. I'm sure there's going to be more transfer rumours for Dan and I to discuss in the lead up to the Everton game. And don't you guys worry, there will be a preview for that as well. Yeah, thank you. Anyone who is listening to this, you are real ones. We know our viewership tends to take an absolute nosedive when Villa loses. Couldn't explain why, but anyone who's listening to this and made it this far, let us know in the comments. Your dedication is truly appreciated by Dan and I. And if you aren't subscribed and you're watching this, make sure you do. Comment your thoughts below, hit the like, follow if you're on Apple and Spotify. And yeah, up the Villa.